do you see the New Testament Christians playing musical instruments? No. Then no musical instruments in worship. There's a very extreme form of this that manifests in the Church of Christ, who you might know a little bit about. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law are Church of Christ folks. Their church a few years ago had a meltdown controversy because they wanted to have a kitchen in their church basement, with microwaves and stoves and things like that. And a big faction in their church said, does the New Testament ever have churches with kitchens?
Yes.
House churches.
Yeah, you're right, but they didn't.
I'm just thinking that's pretty extreme. I mean, they have electricity.
Yeah, right.
Well,
and this is why the regulative principle is always massaged and negotiated. It's never perfectly consistent. But that's sort of the ethos. Now you take a Lutheran who is a Protestant but not a Puritan. Lutherans are cool with vestments and cool with sacraments and cool with, Martin Luther loved the church organ and, used bar tunes that he recast the lyrics and turned them into hymns. And that idea of thinking is not the regulative principle, it's the normative principle. That Scripture, is normative in the sense that it gives us a way of thinking about what we should do in worship and what we probably shouldn't do. But if the Bible doesn't forbid it, it doesn't mean that it's absolutely forbidden. We're free to order our worship by reason and by instinct and nuance and other things. So it's a different way of. But so you say you can be a Protestant between Puritanism and Roman Catholicism. Everybody acknowledges that. But that middle thing is still very Protestant. Newman, is actually, and actually Newman didn't even really invent this way of slicing things. It was invented by a church historian named Mosheim. Basically said that the Church of England is a middle way between Protestantism as such and Roman Catholicism. So it's a third thing entirely, and not Protestant any more than it is Roman Catholic. And this is how Newman was able to construct it, by drawing on the resources of early Christianity, which looked very Catholic and apostolical, but also feeling the need to differentiate himself from Rome. And how did Newman differentiate himself between himself and Roman Catholics? He would say that the Church of England maintained a pure doctrine with that was the church in its fullness. On one hand, the Protestants had gutted the church of all of its connections to the early church. And so their church was arid and malnourished. On the other hand, Newman said that Roman Catholicism is, full of medieval accretions and additions. They're like a snowball that's been rolled down a hill. And so in addition to the pure snow, they've also picked up rocks and twigs and children on their way down the hill. and so whereas the Protestants are starving and malnourished, the Catholics are fat on junk food that's not good for them. So you sort of say, where in the writings of John Chrysostom do you have things like the excessive medieval Roman, medieval Marian devotion? So Newman's mathematics went Protestantism is Anglicanism minus its apostolic foundations. Roman Catholicism is Anglicanism plus a bunch of unhealthy additions.
Superstitions and whatnot.
Yeah. So in the middle, we have the church whole and entire and in its pure form. Rome has overdosed on bad drugs, and the Protestants have starved to death from malnourishment. That's the way he sort of arranged it. Well, that all worked really well, and it was a great ideological thing. It won a lot of conference because who doesn't want to follow Saint John Chrysostom and Saint Irenaeus and these? You've got this lovely heritage that you're able to draw from, and Anglicans have saints' feast days, and the Church of England's liturgy is a medieval low mass. It's the Psalm Rite Missal that's been translated into English, basically. So it works for a while. Then Newman gets into a couple of scrapes. One of them I've got a full chapter on in my dissertation that's my contribution that shows that Newman was pushed to the edge of a cliff by this Catholic priest who was French, named Jaguer. But ultimately, the thing that left him, ready to crumble into the dust, was two experiences. One was that he was reading about a controversy in the early Christian church called the Monophysite controversy. And basically, you have the Monophysites were a compromise movement that kind of cast itself as a middle way between themselves and another heresy called Nestorianism. And Newman, in studying that controversy, began to see some similarities. He said, the middle way, the compromise solution between two extremes. The Catholics were what the Catholics were, the Nestorians were what they were. The Monophysites are still a heresy. And he said, wow, that's a little uncomfortable. But then he came to a more dire kind of comparison, and it was forced on him by a Roman Catholic who finally became the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster when the Catholic Church was restored in England. A guy by the name of Nicholas Wiseman. This is the important part of what makes Catholic theology Catholic. Newman, and I'll give you it this way, represent it graphically so you can follow it. Newman said that the church was apostolical, connected to the apostles, and that sufficed to make them Catholic. If we're connected to the apostles, if we're doing what the apostles in the early church did, that means we're Catholic.
In the little c sense.
Yeah, in the little c sense. Yeah. And that's what was important to him, because that's the thing that you affirm in the Nicene Creed.
Right.
Well, Wiseman said this: there is a sect in early Christianity.
Actually, is that what we affirm in the Nicene Creed?
Yes.
So with the one we say in Mass, we're not saying the big C, we're saying the little c.
We're sure we're saying this.
Well, we're saying the universal now, and the answer is yes. And I'll give you 10 seconds on it, and then if you want to ask me about it, we'll talk a little bit more about it. The church, the definition of the Catholic Church is that the church is one, but especially since Vatican II, we recognize, you recognize, so I'm not Catholic yet, but yeah, that you have separated brethren and sisterin, right? You get so you recognize the baptism, the valid baptism of people who aren't in the Roman Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is already in its self-understanding, the Roman Catholic Church in its self-understanding makes a distinction between itself and the fullness of the church, which is all of the baptized.
That's why you see in the Catechism, and particularly in like canon law and places like that, you don't see a lot of references to the Roman Catholic Church. You see references to in communion with the See of Peter and things like that, talking about being in communion with Rome.
Right. Now the little skip in the heartbeat, it goes like this, and the way that the language goes is that the fullness of the church subsists in the Roman Catholic Church.
Now the fullness of divine revelation and
Right.
all that.
But while the fullness is only there, it's not as though the reality is not other places. So you want to think of it as to categorize it in terms of purity is maybe a bad way to do it. You can sort of think of something as less than, because purity is just a bad way to think about it. But yeah, the reality of the church, the fullness of the church exists in the Roman Catholic communion. But it's not as though the church does not exist anywhere outside its boundaries. And so that's the sort of nickel plate. So when you say that you believe in one holy Catholic, apostolic, and Catholic church, you're using a small c, intentionally, because you believe that the reality of the Roman Catholic Church is something that's desirous of a fuller incarnation, a fuller integration of all the baptized, right? Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, so you have this thing called Donatism. How much do you know about Donatism? Anything? Okay, Donatism starts with going way back to a sect called Novatianism. And the reason why they get their names is a bishop by the name of Donatus and
Look at that.
there you go. The problem in the early church, and we'll talk about this a bit more later, in fact a couple of weeks, is how do you negotiate persecution and the realities that come up with persecution? In a situation of persecution, you're going to have people that are quite willing and able to be martyrs. They're ready to feed you the lions. If you hold fast to your confession, we're going to feed you. And they say, Jesus is Lord, and off to the lions you go. Other people, not quite so sure. Maybe I can sort of renounce my faith with my fingers tied behind my back, whatever. And so people that sort of failed in their fidelity to Jesus under persecution were called lapsi, or the lapsed. They had a lapse in their faith. And the question is, these people are baptized, and then they have lapsed. Can they be reclaimed, restored, received back into the church? Now, keep in mind that this is in an age before the sacrament of reconciliation.